The first rule of survival in this world: don't stand out. I had spent years perfecting it, disappearing into the shadows of the Volkov estate, where danger breathed beneath its marble floors and art-filled walls. I was the hired hand, the invisible worker in a gilded cage. My art restoration skills just another tool at the disposal of the kingpin. No one cared about my name, my history, or my past, until I did something that changed everything. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and expensive paint as I leaned in close, brush in hand, adjusting the restoration on a weathered Van Gogh. I could almost taste the wealth in the air, crisp, suffocating. It wasn't a bad life. For a moment, it felt almost like normal. A strange, absurd comfort in an otherwise precarious existence. But comfort, I knew, was fleeting. My fingers shook slightly as I brushed over a delicate section of the canvas. I had grown used to the tension, to the eyes that seemed to always watch, and the ever-present hum of power that filled this place. Yet, despite the looming shadows, I couldn't help but focus on one thought. Just one more month. One more month to get my sister Chloe the care she needed. Her fragile health tethered to an IV drip in a sterile hospital room. That was why I was here. The money. The patrons. The patron, to be more specific. Nikolai Volkov, the kingpin, whose name was spoken with fear and reverence in every dark corner of the city. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and kindly subscribe. I knew better than to ever look at him. He was a legend, a beast hidden behind sharp suits and colder eyes. But here in this gallery of priceless art, I was invisible. He came and went like the shadows, a predator circling the estate, his presence a weight no one dared question. But that day, I couldn't remain invisible. I heard the soft sound of footsteps, light but purposeful, echoing down the long hallway toward me. I caught the flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. Leo, the youngest son of Nikolai Volkov, whose innocent curiosity was a sharp contrast to his father's ruthless world. He wasn't supposed to be here alone, not without the ever-watchful eyes of his father's enforcers. Yet there he was, darting around the corner, chasing the light of a dust mote dancing in the sun. His laughter, a sound so pure, so innocent, sliced through the tension of the gallery like a razor. I should have ignored him. I should have kept my focus on the restoration. But the sudden, visceral tension in the air couldn't be ignored. My pulse quickened as the hairs on the back of my neck stood at attention. Something was wrong. Without warning, the sharp crack of gunfire shattered the quiet. My heart leapt into my throat. My breath caught. It wasn't a vase. It wasn't a clumsy stumble. It was a shot. A deliberate, calculated attack. Leo froze. I couldn't think. I didn't think. I acted. The instinct was instant, irrational, impulsive. I launched myself toward him, pushing him to the ground and shielding his small frame with my own. The bullet slammed into my shoulder, the searing pain nearly paralyzing me as the world spun. The taste of blood filled my mouth, the metallic tang sharp and bitter. My body hit the cold marble floor, and all I could hear was Leo's frantic cries beneath me. Everything went still. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the heavy footsteps came. I didn't need to look. I could feel the oppressive weight of the world shifting. Nikolai Volkov. The kingpin was here. I had heard his name spoken in hushed tones, feared by everyone who knew him. His reputation was carved in stone, an unyielding force of nature. And now, his eyes were on me, not the invisible restorer who had made his home in the shadows, but the woman who had dared to stop his son's fate with her own. My head swam. My body was numb, but I forced myself to lift my gaze. It met his, and I saw the cold fire in his eyes, a storm waiting to unleash. There was no gratitude, no relief for my act of bravery, just a chilling, predatory focus. I wasn't a savior. I was a pawn. His gaze flickered to Leo, then back to me, a flash of something unreadable in his eyes. His jaw tightened. He said nothing, but his presence filled the room, suffocating the air. And then, his voice, rough like gravel, broke through the silence. What happened? I couldn't speak. My words were lost in the haze of pain and adrenaline. I barely managed to whisper. A bullet. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, never left mine as he knelt down, his gaze sweeping over my blood-soaked shoulder before resting on my face. His hand moved, not toward my wound, but to my chin, tilting my face upward. His touch was cold, firm, possessive. I shouldn't have wanted it. I shouldn't have let him touch me, let him look at me like that. But my body betrayed me, trembled slightly beneath his touch. Don't lie to me, Ducha. The word hit me like a jolt of electricity. Ducha. His voice was rough, commanding, and for a split second I felt something stir deep within me that I couldn't control. I shouldn't want to know him. I shouldn't want to register his presence. Yet in that moment I did. And as I looked into his eyes, I knew that my world had just shifted, and nothing at all, would ever be the same again. The gallery was now a place of shadows, of uncertainty, a far cry from the sanctuary it once seemed. I lay there, breath shallow, heart racing, and I could feel the weight of Nikolai's gaze searing through me. I had been invisible once, but not anymore. Not after today. My past was simple, a life of quiet restoration, the hope of saving my sister. But now, I was part of something far darker, far more dangerous. This was no longer just about me. I had become a part of Nikolai Volkov's world, and I had no idea just how deep I was about to fall. The pain from my shoulder was unbearable at first, a constant throb that gnawed at my nerves. But as the days passed, the pain became a distant, familiar ache. I tried to focus on the task at hand, the restoration of another piece in Nikolai Volkov's collection, but it was difficult to concentrate when the weight of his presence was ever near. It wasn't just the physical injury that left me feeling captive. It was the uncertainty, the knowing that I was no longer invisible, that I no longer had control. They told me I was lucky. The doctors and nurses who treated my wound whispered that it should have been far worse. The bullet had grazed my shoulder, leaving a painful but not life-threatening injury. The worst part, they said, was the blood loss. But I had no way of knowing how much I'd lost. I was too focused on Leo, on the gut-wrenching urge to protect him, to care about myself. Now, I was here, conscious, bandaged, and trapped. The Volkov estate was a place of beauty, but beauty had a way of suffocating when it was used as a tool for control. Marble floors gleamed beneath the soft light that filtered through stained glass windows. Expensive carpets, intricate sculptures, and priceless paintings were scattered around the grand hallways like silent sentinels, watching every step I took. It felt like a museum where I was the exhibit, everything polished to perfection, everything carefully curated. Except the eyes that watched me, hidden in corners, tucked in frames, and embedded in walls. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were always on me. I was nothing but a spectator, a ghost moving through rooms where I was no longer a visitor, but an unspoken part of the decor. At least they let me keep my work. The art, the brushes, the canvas. My only link to the life I used to know. But I wasn't allowed to leave. Not unless Nikolai decided otherwise. Days passed in a haze of quiet conversations, whispered orders, and the steady, persistent hum of an unseen world. I spent most of my time alone, but that was nothing new. I had become accustomed to solitude long before I was brought to the estate. What had changed was the way I was now watched. There were cameras everywhere, hidden ones. I could feel their presence like a prickling sensation against my skin. The first time I realized it, I was in the gallery, restoring a piece of abstract art I couldn't bring myself to care about. My fingers hesitated, lingering over the textured surface of the canvas, as I noticed something in the corner of the room. A slight glint from a mirror on the wall caught my eye, and my heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the reflection of myself I saw. No, I was standing too far to catch that. It was a camera, small, hidden, watching. I immediately looked away, but the damage was done. The room felt smaller, more suffocating, and the air grew thicker with the weight of unseen eyes. It wasn't just in the gallery. I began noticing them everywhere. The bathroom mirror, the hallway lights, the ornate sconces on the walls. All were disguised cameras, watching me from angles I had once assumed were harmless. It dawned on me then that I was not just under watch. I was being controlled, kept in line with the steady rhythm of observation. But what did Nikolai want from me? What did this protection really mean? The question gnawed at me, its answer just out of reach. I had been shielded from something, someone, and yet I still didn't know if my role in this dangerous world had been decided. I was no longer just an art restorer. I was a piece of Nikolai's empire, a piece he had chosen to keep close. And he wasn't the type of man to keep anything around that didn't serve a purpose. The days bled into one another, and I became more attuned to the rhythms of the estate. I could hear the faint sound of footsteps in the hallways outside my room, the soft murmurs of the guards as they passed. I could feel the eyes in the corners of every room, the constant presence of unseen forces pulling at the edges of my mind. And every so often, Nikolai would appear, like a shadow in the doorway, his gaze sharp, calculating. It wasn't like he was watching me. No, it was far more intense than that. He was studying me. I learned quickly that the few moments I had alone were fleeting, taken from me by the ever-watchful eyes of his enforcers. I couldn't escape them, not physically, and not mentally either. The oppressive nature of this place had begun to settle in my bones, suffocating me with each passing hour. One evening, while I worked in the dimly lit room, I found myself staring at the same spot on the canvas for far too long. My mind wandered. What would it feel like to leave? To escape this gilded cage? Was that even possible? Every exit was watched, every door locked. I knew that. But the thought still lingered. The estate had become my prison, and the world outside, with its sense of danger, seemed far more welcoming. At least out there, I had known my place. Now, inside these walls, I was just another pawn in a much larger game. I could feel the pressure mounting. Nikolai's world was far too dangerous, far too twisted for me to ever truly understand. Yet, I couldn't ignore the strange, confusing pull he had on me. He was always just there, watching, waiting. It was as if I was both invisible and all too visible to him at the same time. That was the price of staying alive. I had saved Leo, and in doing so, had unknowingly signed myself into this world, this cage, this empire. No matter how much I wanted to break free, I couldn't deny that the strings had already been tied. The door creaked open behind me, and I instinctively straightened. My heart skipped when I saw the familiar silhouette in the doorway. Nikolai. He was silent as always, his figure imposing in the dim light. His eyes were unreadable as he studied me. For a moment, I thought I could see something like a flicker of amusement in his expression, but it vanished too quickly to be sure. "You're working late," he said, his voice low and steady. I didn't respond immediately. What was there to say? The task had become more of a ritual than a job. The art didn't matter to me anymore, not like it used to. Not with the weight of this place pressing down on me. "I never expected you to be so good at it," he continued, stepping further into the room. "I assumed you'd be like everyone else, nothing special. But you've surprised me." I didn't know how to respond to that. He was looking at me as if I were a puzzle, something he was piecing together with every glance. "I'm just trying to keep busy," I said quietly, my voice sounding thinner than I intended. He tilted his head slightly, studying me with that predatory gaze. "Keeping busy, or keeping yourself from thinking about what's really happening?" I froze. He was right, but I wouldn't let him know that. "Perhaps," I murmured, avoiding his gaze. There was a long, tense silence. I could feel the weight of his attention on me, the way his presence filled every inch of the room, suffocating any chance of escaping into the work I had once loved. He leaned slightly against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "You're not a prisoner, Avery. Not yet." I didn't look up, but I could feel his words settle heavily between us. The room suddenly felt smaller, tighter. He had made sure I understood. I was his to control, his to keep. And as much as I wanted to deny it, I knew, deep down, I wasn't going anywhere. "Then why am I still here?" I asked quietly, finally meeting his eyes. He smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of his lips that made my skin prickle. Because you're useful, Avery. And because I don't let go of things easily. That smile, that expression, held 1,000 meanings. I had no idea which one was true, but in that moment, I realized something chilling. The game had begun, and I was already a player, whether I wanted to be or not. The estate had always felt like a prison, its golden walls a beautiful illusion. But now, as the days dragged on, I began to see the bars that held me captive. Bars made of influence, fear, and a power far greater than I had ever imagined. I had been careful, keeping my distance from the heart of Nikolai Volkov's world. The estate was sprawling, a kingdom of marble and glass. But it was also a fortress. The guards, silent and unblinking, were as much a part of the scenery as the paintings that lined the walls. The enforcers, the men who worked for Volkov, were even more imposing. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that never seemed to relax. They moved with precision, their footsteps echoing through the hallways like a constant reminder of the world I had been thrust into. I had spent the last few days with my head down, working in the gallery, trying to stay as invisible as I could. But that was becoming harder by the day. I was no longer just the art restorer. I was his art restorer, and it seemed that everything I did, every breath I took, was being watched. Nikolai had made it clear that I was useful to him. That much was obvious. He had kept me here, not out of some misplaced gratitude, but because of the act I'd done to save his son. But I wasn't naive enough to think that his interest in me was purely out of kindness. He was a businessman, and I had no illusions about how he viewed people, me included. And yet, as much as I wanted to hate him, to despise everything he represented, there was something undeniably magnetic about Nikolai, something that tugged at the darkest corners of my mind, pulling me deeper into his world whether I wanted to be there or not. The first real interaction with him came that morning. I had just finished my latest restoration, a delicate portrait that had once been part of Volkov's personal collection, and was gathering my things when I heard the familiar soft thud of his boots against the floor. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen him in days, and his sudden presence now made me feel like I was caught under the microscope, exposed in ways I didn't want to be. Avery, his voice rumbled, low and authoritative. He didn't need to raise it. His presence alone commanded attention. I turned to face him, finding him standing in the doorway, a sharp contrast to the serene stillness of the gallery. His broad shoulders filled the frame of the door, and the dim light reflected off his black suit, making his eyes seem even colder, more piercing. The air felt heavier when he was around, charged with an almost tangible energy. He stepped forward, the floor creaking beneath his weight, and my pulse quickened. "I need your help with something," he said, his eyes scanning the room as if assessing it, or perhaps me, in a way that made me feel like nothing more than an object in his world. I didn't respond immediately. What could I say? I was just the hired help, the one who restored his art. But it was clear that his expectations of me had shifted since that day. I wasn't just an observer anymore. "Come with me," he said, turning without waiting for my response. His voice was firm, unyielding. He wasn't asking, he was telling me. I followed him, my feet heavy, each step feeling like an echo of everything that had brought me to this point. It wasn't a grand command, nothing overtly dangerous, but it felt like the moment when a door closes, locking you in a room from which there is no escape. We walked through the estate, past the sprawling marble floors and the expensive art lining the walls. I couldn't help but notice the way he moved, silent, efficient, but with an air of dominance that rippled through the space. His eyes never strayed from the path ahead, but I could feel them, cold and calculating, as they occasionally flicked toward me. I was acutely aware of his presence, of the way my body reacted to his every step. But I didn't let it show. We reached the back of the estate, where the quiet, hidden parts of his world seemed to come alive in ways I hadn't expected. The hallways here were darker, the shadows deeper, and the soft murmur of voices that filtered from rooms ahead told me that this was not where guests were brought. This was the heart of Volkov's empire. You're about to see just how deep this goes, he said, his voice low, almost as if speaking to himself. He stopped in front of a door, one that I hadn't noticed before, and slid a keycard into the lock. The door clicked open, revealing a small room that felt like a control center of some kind. Banks of computers hummed, and large monitors covered the walls. There were no windows, no paintings, just cold metal, hard technology, and the unmistakable scent of cigarette smoke lingering in the air. I stepped inside hesitantly, feeling like a stranger in a world I wasn't supposed to see. I had restored his art, but I had never seen this side of him. The business, the operations, the empire that stretched far beyond the walls of the estate. This is where I handle my affairs, Nikolai said, his voice almost reverent, yet tinged with the weight of authority. He moved toward one of the monitors and typed something quickly. You may not understand all of it, but you will soon. I watched as he navigated through a series of encrypted files, flicking through pictures, names, numbers, things I couldn't even begin to understand. It was clear he was talking about more than just art. This was his network, his empire, and it was vast. You've been in my world long enough to know there's more to it than just art restoration, he said, glancing at me with a faint glimmer of something unreadable in his eyes. You'll be working with us now. Your skills aren't just for paint and canvases. You'll see things, help with other matters. I was quiet for a moment, absorbing his words. It wasn't the first time I had felt like a pawn, but this was different. The weight of his words lingered in the air, and the truth of his propositions settled in my chest like a heavy stone. You want me to help with your business, I said finally, unsure of whether I was inviting something much darker or simply acknowledging what I already knew. Exactly, he replied without hesitation. You've already proven yourself valuable. I don't let people like you go once they're useful. I swallowed hard, not quite knowing how to respond. I had always been cautious, always kept my head down. But now, in this moment, I realized that my quiet existence had just come to an end. I wasn't just an art restorer anymore. I was part of something much bigger, something I couldn't fully understand yet. His gaze softened, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. He looked at me as though I were a piece of the puzzle he was building. You're not a prisoner, Avery, he said, his voice almost kind. But I knew better than to take it at face value. Not yet. I couldn't decide whether to be comforted or terrified by those words. I wasn't a prisoner yet, but the question lingered. When would I become one? I spent the rest of the day in that room with him, learning more about the depth of Nikolai's operations. I could see now just how far-reaching his influence was. He didn't just own this estate. He owned the city, the people in it, the businesses, the dark corners that most people never saw. He was untouchable, and everyone in this world knew it. I began to understand the complexity of his character. He was cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless when it came to protecting his empire. But there was something else lurking beneath the surface, something that made me question my instincts, that made me wonder if there was more to him than just the kingpin. He wasn't like other criminals. He had control over everything. But there was something about the way he looked at me that made me wonder if, deep down, he saw me as more than just another pawn. I couldn't deny it any longer. I was no longer just an observer. I was a part of his world now, whether I wanted to be or not. The air inside the estate was always thick with tension. But today, it felt suffocating. I had learned to navigate the Volkov estate like a shadow, quiet, unseen, and mostly unnoticed. But the walls that had once felt like a gilded cage had begun to close in, each passing day making it harder to breathe. Nikolai Volkov had a way of keeping his empire running smoothly, his control so complete that it seemed impossible for anything to slip through the cracks. Yet, something was different now. The air hummed with the undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place, a danger that lurked just out of sight. I was still recovering from my injury, my shoulder a constant reminder of how easily I had been thrust into this world. But the wound was nothing compared to the weight of what I had begun to uncover. Something wasn't right. A shift, a tension that didn't belong. I could feel it in the way the enforcers moved, too cautious, too alert. The air was thick with secrets, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I realized that I was no longer a passive observer in this dangerous game. I had been trying to keep my distance, working quietly in the gallery, pretending that nothing had changed. But the more I watched, the more I understood that the lines between survival and complicity were blurring. The truth was, I had already become a part of Nikolai's world, and no matter how much I tried to fight it, it was only a matter of time before I was pulled deeper into the storm. It started one night while I was alone in the gallery. The rest of the estate had fallen into the quiet lull of midnight, the house holding its breath in the eerie silence that always seemed to settle after hours. I was going over the details of my latest restoration, the steady brushstrokes almost hypnotic, when I stumbled upon something that didn't belong. At first, it was just a small, discarded piece of paper, half hidden beneath the edge of one of the antique frames. My curiosity piqued. I picked it up, unfurling it slowly. It was a note, hastily scribbled, its meaning cryptic. It didn't take long for my eyes to catch the words, "Shipment delayed. They know." I froze, the blood draining from my face. The paper felt like it was burning in my hand. The implications were clear. The note wasn't just an idle warning. It was a signal of something far more dangerous. I had heard whispers of business dealings, secret shipments, and rivals, but this was different. This was treason. The note was signed with nothing but a symbol, an intricate design that resembled a snake coiled around a dagger. I didn't recognize it, but I didn't need to. A symbol like that was one of power, a marker of a deeper connection to something far darker than I had imagined. I felt my pulse quicken, the weight of the note pressing down on me. Someone within Nikolai's empire was betraying him. Someone was feeding information to their enemies, and I was the one who had found it. I didn't know what to do. I had been working in the shadows, avoiding Nikolai's attention. But this was something I couldn't ignore. If I told him, I would be stepping into a world of danger far beyond anything I had ever encountered. But if I didn't, the very empire I had been pulled into would crumble, and I would be caught in the crossfire. I kept the note hidden, tucked away in the folds of my dress, my mind racing. The danger was palpable, the tension too thick to ignore. I had to know more. The next morning, I was summoned to Nikolai's office. I entered the room cautiously, my pulse thudding in my chest. The office was a stark contrast to the opulence of the rest of the estate. Functional, efficient, and cold. Nikolai sat behind a large desk, his eyes sharp as they locked onto mine. His gaze didn't waver, and for a moment, the world outside the room felt like it had disappeared. There was only him, only the kingpin. "You've been quiet," he said, his voice smooth but edged with something darker. "You've been quiet, and that's good, but I need something from you now." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The note I had found last night burned in my pocket. The weight of it felt like a stone pressing against my skin. Nikolai didn't speak again, but his gaze never left me, his eyes calculating, probing. I felt exposed, like I was being sized up for something far more dangerous than I was ready for. "I've been hearing things," he continued, leaning forward slightly. "Things that don't sit right. I need someone I can trust to handle this." The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a tension that I couldn't shake. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. His gaze hardened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something almost desperate in his eyes. "I need you to find out who's leaking information to our rivals. There's a traitor in my ranks." I froze. His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. The traitor. The very thing I had feared when I found the note. But this was far bigger than anything I could have imagined. "I don't want you to go looking for it," he added, his voice low and firm. "I want you to see it. I want you to know it when you look at them. You'll know who they are. I'm trusting you." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. I had never seen this side of him. He was calculating, cold. But there was something else, something raw, almost human, in the way he looked at me. This wasn't a command given lightly. This was him putting his trust in me, and that was something I wasn't sure I could handle. "I'll find them," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a promise. It was a survival instinct. Nikolai's lips twitched, the smallest of smiles playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good," he said. "You'll have access to everything you need, all the information, all the people. I trust you, Avery." And just like that, the invisible thread that had tied me to his world grew stronger. There was no turning back now. I had been given a task, and the weight of it was heavy on my shoulders. If I failed, it wouldn't just be my life that was at risk. It would be everything. Everything Nikolai had built. Everything he controlled. I was trapped, not by chains but by choices. The rest of the day passed in a blur. The enforcers were more on edge than usual, their eyes darting suspiciously, and the tension within the estate grew palpable. The betrayal wasn't just a whisper in the background anymore. It was here, in the air, in the quiet moments when no one spoke. I could feel it tightening around me, wrapping itself around every person, every conversation, every movement. And as I walked the halls, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer just a part of the estate's fabric. I wasn't a quiet observer anymore. I was part of the machine. A machine that would either protect me or destroy me. The stakes had changed. The game had changed. The next morning I began my investigation. I had to find the mole, the one who was leaking information to Volkov's enemies. The note I had found seemed like a starting point, but it wasn't enough. I needed to go deeper, see the things that weren't obvious, understand the cracks that ran beneath the surface. The estate was still. Too still. Everyone had their roles, their places, and there were eyes everywhere. The enforcers didn't speak much, but I could feel their eyes on me when I moved through the halls. They were watching, just as Nikolai had warned. Every step, every whisper, was a chance for me to slip up. But I wasn't going to slip up. I wasn't going to fail. Not now. Not when I had already made my choice. The tension in the estate was palpable, and I could feel it gnawing at me. The deeper I went into this world, the more dangerous it became. But I wasn't turning back. Not anymore. The game was in motion, and I was playing for keeps. The estate was a fortress. But even fortresses had weaknesses. I'd come to realize that in the time I'd spent within these walls. Nikolai Volkov's empire was vast, stretching far beyond the estate's marble floors and guarded halls. It was a web of criminal dealings, business fronts, and alliances that held the city in a chokehold. On the surface, it all seemed perfect. Too perfect, in fact. But beneath the surface, something was bubbling. Something that threatened to tear the empire apart. The attack on Leo was only the beginning. That much became clear as I walked the estate with a new set of eyes. I wasn't just an art restorer anymore. I was an asset. One Nikolai didn't quite trust yet, but one he recognized as useful. He had given me a task: uncover the traitor in his ranks. But as I dug deeper, something else began to emerge. A far more dangerous threat was on the horizon. And it wasn't just the mole I had been tasked with finding. There were whispers in the halls, quieter now but unmistakable. My steps were light, and my thoughts heavier than ever. The estate was not as secure as it seemed. I'd seen it in the guarded looks of the enforcers, the clipped whispers behind closed doors. The attack on Leo had rattled Nikolai, but there was something far bigger at play. Something none of us had anticipated. I was working late in the gallery that night, the silence of the space broken only by the rhythmic brush of my hand against the canvas. My mind had wandered, consumed by the ever-growing tension, when I heard footsteps. Not just any footsteps. These were too measured, too deliberate. Nikolai's voice was low when he entered, his figure filling the doorway. He was dressed in his usual dark suit, but tonight there was something in his posture that spoke volumes. Tension radiated from him, a rare crack in his otherwise unshakable exterior. "You're still here," he said, his voice almost surprised, though not in a condescending way. I straightened, setting down the brush. "I've been busy," I said, meeting his gaze, though my stomach twisted at the look in his eyes. Something was wrong. He didn't move immediately. His gaze swept across the room, as though searching for something. Then his eyes landed on me. The weight of them was heavy. Too heavy. "We have a problem," he said, his words deliberate, cutting through the air. I frowned, my pulse quickening. "Another attack?" I asked, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. But I already knew. The air between us had shifted, and the unease that settled in my stomach now made sense. "Worse," he replied, his voice hard. "This isn't just about Leo. It's a coordinated attack. They're trying to take everything." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. I swallowed, my mouth dry. "Who's behind it?" Nikolai looked at me, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowed with the weight of whatever knowledge he held. "I don't know yet, but I know it's not just about Leo. It's about power, and they'll stop at nothing to get it." I could hear the danger in his voice, the raw edge of something he didn't often allow to show. His empire was under attack, and I could sense that the full scale of it hadn't even hit yet. "What can I do?" I asked, surprising myself with the words. There was no hesitation. The old part of me, the one that wanted to stay hidden, to keep my distance, had already been swallowed by this world, consumed by it. I had no choice but to keep moving forward. And as much as I hated it, I knew now that I was involved in something far bigger than myself. Nikolai's gaze flicked to me, studying me with a complexity I didn't fully understand. For a moment, there was something in his expression that felt almost like respect. Then, as if realizing what he had shown, his face hardened again, the mask of the kingpin slipping back into place. "Help me shore up the estate's defenses. We need to secure every angle, every door, every window. If they want to take us down, we need to be ready." I nodded, though the reality of his words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I was about to dive deeper into this world, and there was no turning back now. The walls of the estate were closing in on me, but this time, they weren't just prison bars, they were my lifeline. If I wanted to survive, I had to help. I had to act. I followed Nikolai as he led me through the hallways, passing the enforcers who always seemed to be watching, never speaking, but always waiting for a sign. They greeted him with a subtle nod, but I knew they were watching me too. I had become a part of his world, and there was no escaping it. As we moved deeper into the estate, I couldn't help but notice the subtle changes. The way the enforcers moved with more purpose now. The tension in their shoulders. The whisper of hushed voices that I wasn't meant to hear. There was a nervous energy that crackled through the estate, and it wasn't just the attack on Leo. It was something bigger, something they were all afraid of. Nikolai brought me to the central security room, where the monitors flickered with data from all over the estate. The room was dim, the only light coming from the screens that cast an eerie glow across the dark faces of the enforcers standing guard. They didn't speak as Nikolai entered, but I could feel their eyes following him, and then me, as I stepped inside. "Start with the perimeter," he instructed, his tone low and commanding. "We need to reinforce every weak point." I didn't hesitate. I approached the nearest monitor, scanning the footage of the estate's exterior. Every camera, every angle was accounted for, but I knew that wasn't enough. This wasn't a simple infiltration. This was something more coordinated, more dangerous. "What are we looking for?" I asked, my voice steady, though inside I was reeling. The reality of the situation was starting to settle on me like a weight I couldn't shake. Nikolai was watching me, his eyes sharp. Patterns. Anything that doesn't fit. This isn't a random attack. It's planned. They've studied us. I nodded, scanning the footage carefully. The enforcers had already started to mark potential blind spots, areas where the cameras had been tampered with, or where the surveillance had failed. But something felt off. The longer I looked, the more the pieces began to fall into place. "This is bigger than just the estate," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Nikolai didn't reply immediately. His gaze shifted from the monitors to me, an unreadable expression on his face. He didn't need to say anything. He already knew. Everything's connected, I continued, more to myself than to him. Whoever's behind this, they've been planning this for months, maybe longer. It's not just about Leo. It's about bringing you down, piece by piece. He looked at me, his gaze intense, thoughtful. That's why I need you, Avery. You see things that others don't. You've got the right mind for this. I didn't know what to say to that. The words felt hollow, because in that moment, I realized just how far I had fallen into this world. I wasn't just a passive participant anymore. I was a part of the Empire, and I was going to help protect it, even if that meant risking everything. The tension in the room deepened as the enforcers began to move into position. Nikolai turned to me, his eyes dark with a mix of calculation and something else, something that felt like a warning. "You're not just here to help me, Avery," he said, his voice low. "You're here to make sure we survive this. We have no room for mistakes." I didn't answer, but inside, something stirred, a sense of purpose, a sense of something greater than myself, even if it meant embracing the darkness of this world. I was no longer just the woman who restored paintings. I was part of the Volkov Empire, and I would do whatever it took to protect it. The clock was ticking. The attack had already begun, and this time, there would be no second chances. The weight of my decision pressed on me like a stone lodged deep in my chest, impossible to ignore, impossible to dislodge. Each breath I took felt heavier, more strained than the last, as if the air itself had become thicker, suffocating with the gravity of everything I was starting to understand. Nikolai had given me a choice. The idea of leaving had crossed my mind more than once, but each time it had been fleeting. Every moment in this house, the long, silent corridors, the cold eyes of the enforcers, the constant hum of surveillance, reminded me of how deeply I had sunk into this world. There was no escaping it now, not without a price. The attack on Leo, the betrayal within Nikolai's ranks, it had all been a warning. A warning that I was far more valuable to him than I'd ever wanted to be. He had been blunt with me, as always. He'd made his intentions clear, offering me a permanent role within his empire. I'd become more than just the art restorer, more than just a pawn in his world of power and violence. To him, I was an asset, someone whose mind he trusted, someone whose loyalty he demanded. The question was no longer whether I was useful to him. It was whether I wanted to stay in a world that had no place for freedom, no place for independence. The offer was simple enough, in his terms. I would work for him, not just restoring his art, but helping with the intricate web of his empire. I would become a permanent fixture in his world, but there was no such thing as freedom here, no real choice, and that's where the problem lay. His world was mine to navigate now, whether I liked it or not. His protection, his ever-watchful eyes, were the only thing keeping me safe. But at what cost? I had been living in his house, breathing his air, working with his people for weeks now. But in all that time, I had never been able to get a clear answer about what I was to him, about what my future would look like. Was I just a tool, a woman in his collection, a piece of his world that he was willing to keep close for his convenience? Or was there more to it? More that I didn't yet understand. The estate felt smaller with each passing day, its grandeur now a gilded cage. The enforcers, once faceless shadows, now watched me like hawks, never letting me out of their sight. I was always aware of their presence, even when I didn't see them. The cameras, the microphones, everything I did was monitored, every move I made calculated. There was no room to breathe, no room to think, not without his eyes on me. I had no illusions anymore. This was his world. I was just a part of it, whether I liked it or not. The hardest part was Nikolai himself. I had started to see past the kingpin, the ruthless crime lord, and glimpsed the man beneath the cold exterior. The man who carried the weight of his empire on his shoulders, who protected his family, and, somehow, me. He had shown me parts of himself I wasn't sure he meant to, and the contradictions in him stirred something inside me, something I didn't know how to handle. He had saved me, yes, but he had also imprisoned me. His protection was both a gift and a curse, an unspoken contract that tied me to him in ways I hadn't realized until now. There were moments when I saw something softer in him, moments when he looked at me with a hint of something I couldn't quite place, something that made my heart race and my thoughts scatter. But the truth was undeniable. He was the storm that I had been caught in, and I was no longer sure whether I wanted to weather it or find a way to break free. I sat in the gallery late one evening, my fingers brushing against the frame of the latest painting I had restored. The brushstrokes felt mechanical now, like something I did just to keep my hands busy, my mind from wandering too far. I had already finished the work, but I couldn't bring myself to leave the gallery. And then, he appeared. His presence filled the room before he even spoke. Nikolai didn't need to announce himself. I could feel him, a palpable force in the air. He stood in the doorway, his eyes fixed on me, his expression unreadable as always. But there was something in the set of his jaw, something in the way his gaze lingered, that made me freeze. The silence between us was thick with unspoken words, with things we both knew but never said. I didn't move. I couldn't. "Do you ever wonder what your life could be outside of this?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper, as if the question itself was a delicate thing. I glanced up at him, caught off guard by the question. "I think about it sometimes," I admitted, my voice steady but my heart pounding. "But it doesn't matter now, does it?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence growing more intense, more overwhelming. I couldn't look away. "You're part of my world now, Avery," he said softly, but there was a hardness beneath his words. "You've seen things most people never get the chance to. You know the cost of power. You've learned the price of loyalty." I didn't respond, the weight of his words sinking deep into me. I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that I hadn't signed up for this, but I couldn't. I knew the truth. I was already too far in. "I'm offering you a place here," he continued, his tone harder now, as if the decision had already been made. "A permanent role. The world you're in now, it's dangerous, but it's also powerful. You won't find anything like it outside these walls." I felt my breath catch in my throat. The offer was clear. He wasn't asking. He was telling me. "And if I refuse?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my heart thudding against my ribs. He didn't answer immediately. He only took a step closer, the distance between us closing as if we were bound by invisible threads. His eyes never left mine. "If you leave, you'll have nothing. You'll be exposed. You won't be safe, and I will make sure you never forget what you could have had." I shivered at his words. They weren't threats. They were promises, and they carried a weight I couldn't ignore. The room seemed to close in around me. My mind raced with the possibilities, with the choices that lay before me. I could stay, embrace this life, and be bound to him forever. Or I could leave, take the risk of freedom, and face whatever dangers awaited me on the outside. But leaving meant giving up everything. It meant giving up him. I had no illusions about what I was in for. Nikolai had made it clear that there was no freedom in his world, no true escape. And yet, part of me couldn't shake the thought that I might still be able to reclaim some of myself, some of my independence, if I left. But that was the question, wasn't it? Could I leave him? Could I walk away from the man who had become everything in my life, for better or worse? He was my protector, but he was also my prison. "I don't want your loyalty because you're afraid, Avery," he said, his voice softer now, almost coaxing. "I want it because you see the value in what I'm offering you, because you understand that I'm offering you a place by my side." And that was the crux of it. He wasn't asking for my love. He wasn't asking for my allegiance. He was asking for my submission. And that was something I couldn't give him. Not yet. But the question lingered, unspoken. Could I survive outside this world? or would I destroy myself trying to escape it? Nikolai's gaze softened just a fraction, the raw intensity in his eyes shifting. You don't have to decide now, Avery. But I need you to understand this. You're mine, and you'll always have a place with me. The question is, will you accept it? And there it was, the choice, the moment I had been dreading. I'll think about it, I said, my voice steady but the turmoil inside me threatening to break free. His lips twisted into a small, knowing smile. I know you will. And with that, he turned and left, the door closing behind him with a soft click. The silence that followed was deafening. I was trapped. The question now wasn't if I would leave. It was whether I could live with the choice I had to make. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and fear. The Volkov estate, once a fortress of power and control, now felt like the center of a storm that had been brewing for years and had finally come to a head. Inside these walls, a war was being fought, not just between rival factions, but between loyalty and betrayal, power and survival. The criminal empire that Nikolai Volkov had built was under siege, and the price of that power had never been clearer. I had seen it coming, but nothing could have prepared me for the magnitude of the war that was unfolding. It was more than just a series of attacks. It was a calculated, coordinated effort by the enemies of the Volkov family to dismantle everything he had built. Every move we made was met with a response from someone who wanted to see us burn. It wasn't just about Leo anymore. It was about Nikolai's legacy, and it was being threatened from all sides. The estate had become a battleground, a war zone masked by the false beauty of marble floors and gilded hallways. Nikolai's enforcers, once a silent and controlled presence, were now a constant force, their eyes ever watchful, their movements sharp. I had learned quickly that there was no room for hesitation in this world. You either played the game, or you became collateral damage. My place in this world was no longer that of a passive observer. I had been pulled into the very heart of it, and as much as I hated to admit it, I had begun to see things I couldn't unsee. Nikolai's power was vast, but so were his enemies. And now, it seemed, we were at the center of a war that threatened to tear everything apart. I sat across from Nikolai in the dimly lit war room, the tension palpable between us. He was calm, too calm almost, as he surveyed the maps and intelligence reports laid out before him. The flicker of light from the nearby security monitors cast shadows across his face, sharpening his already imposing features. In that moment, I could see the weight of the empire on his shoulders, the burden of leadership that he carried so effortlessly. "What's the next move?" I asked, my voice steady, though I could feel the tremor of uncertainty beneath the words. I had no illusions about what was at stake. I wasn't just helping him anymore. I was in this with him, and whatever happened next would shape the future for both of us. Nikolai's eyes flicked to mine, his gaze piercing, as if he could see through me. "We fight," he said, his voice a low growl. "We outsmart them. We make them regret ever thinking they could take me down." His words were sharp, decisive, but the underlying threat in them was something I had come to understand in my time here. Nikolai wasn't just a kingpin. He was a survivor, and survival in his world was a constant battle. The rival crime families had been biding their time, waiting for a moment of weakness. And now, they had found it. They had attacked Leo, and now, they were attacking everything else. Nikolai's businesses, his alliances, his people. They were striking at his empire from within, using betrayal and espionage to erode his power. I had seen the signs. There were whispers in the halls, murmurs of loyalty fractured by greed, by fear. The Volkov family wasn't just under attack from the outside. It was being torn apart from within. I had witnessed the paranoia that now gripped the estate. The once trusted enforcers were looking over their shoulders, questioning their own. No one could be trusted. The line between ally and enemy had blurred beyond recognition. As the hours passed, I moved through the estate, working alongside Nikolai's enforcers to shore up security, identify potential weaknesses, and prepare for the inevitable. The estate was a maze of secret corridors, hidden rooms, and well-guarded vaults, and every inch of it needed to be secured. I had grown accustomed to the constant presence of the enforcers, their cold, calculating eyes always on me. But now, There was an added tension in their movements, an urgency that had not been there before. I wasn't just working on art anymore. I wasn't just a bystander in the shadows. I was becoming a part of the strategy, my mind used to outthink and outmaneuver the enemies who sought to bring us down. The more I learned about the inner workings of Nikolai's world, the more I understood that my value to him went beyond the art I restored. I was an asset, someone whose intellect he could use. And yet, despite the chaos surrounding us, despite the danger that loomed over every step we took, there were moments when Nikolai's presence was the only thing that grounded me. I had come to see him in a way I never had before. His ruthlessness was no longer just a characteristic. It was a survival mechanism. His ability to stay calm under pressure, to make decisions that others would shy away from, was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. But beneath the cold exterior, beneath the kingpin that everyone feared, there was a man who, in his own way, cared. I had seen it in the way he looked at Leo, in the way he had watched over me after the attack, in the subtle ways he protected those who were loyal to him. And then, there was the part of me that couldn't deny the attraction I felt for him, the pull that went beyond his power and his control. It was a dangerous feeling, one that I knew would only complicate things. But it was there, undeniable, like a current beneath the surface, tugging at me with every passing moment. As we moved into the night, Nikolai and I worked side by side, planning, strategizing, preparing for the war that was coming. The estate was still, too still. The only sounds were the clicking of the keyboards, the low murmur of orders being given, the rush of the enforcers moving into place. But beneath the silence, there was a crackle of tension that electrified the air. The attack was coming. It was only a matter of time. And then, as if on cue, the first explosion rocked the estate. The ground beneath us shook, the windows rattling as the sound of distant gunfire echoed through the walls. The attack had begun. "We need to move," Nikolai said, his voice steady, though I could hear the edge of fury in his tone. He grabbed my arm, pulling me towards the emergency exit as the chaos began to unfold. The enforcers were already in motion, moving quickly and efficiently as they spread out to defend the estate. The sound of gunfire was deafening, and the air was thick with the stench of smoke and blood. Nikolai's face was a mask of calm, his eyes scanning the battlefield as he issued orders, his presence a beacon of authority amid the chaos. I stayed close to him, my heart pounding in my chest as we moved deeper into the heart of the estate. The security systems had been breached, the cameras flickering and cutting out as the enemy moved through the estate like ghosts. Nikolai had anticipated this, but even he couldn't have predicted the full scale of the attack. "We need to get to the main vault," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Everything hinges on that vault. If they get to it, we lose everything." I nodded, my mind racing. We couldn't afford to lose this fight, not now, not when everything was on the line. As we moved through the estate, Nikolai's enforcers engaged with the intruders, their movements fluid and deadly. The violence was relentless, each exchange a brutal reminder of the world we lived in. The estate was under siege, and every corner we turned brought us closer to the heart of the chaos. I had never been so close to danger before, never so immersed in the brutality of the underworld. But as I moved alongside Nikolai, I couldn't shake the feeling that, for all the violence and bloodshed, I was exactly where I was meant to be. The question was no longer whether I would survive. It was whether I could live with the consequences of the choices I had made, and the choices yet to come. We reached the vault, and the sight of it, solid, impenetrable, standing like a fortress, was both a relief and a reminder of how much was at stake. The enforcers stood guard, weapons drawn, eyes sharp, as Nikolai and I took our positions. "This is it," he said, his voice low, his gaze fixed on the door. "We win this. We win everything." I nodded, my heart still pounding in my chest, my thoughts clear despite the chaos. The war had only just begun, and I was right there in the middle of it, fighting alongside the man who had brought me into this world. As the night stretched on, the battles raged, but one thing became clear. This fight was far from over. The silence that followed the storm was suffocating. The walls of the Volkov estate, once a sanctuary of power and opulence, now seemed hollow. The echoes of gunfire and shouts still reverberated in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the war we had just fought, and barely survived. The aftermath was a cacophony of broken bodies, fractured alliances, and a city teetering on the edge of chaos. But as the dust settled and the chaos began to die down, one thing became clear to me. My life had changed irrevocably. I stood in the heart of the estate, watching as the enforcers worked to clean up the wreckage, restoring order to a place that had nearly been torn apart. The fire of the battle still burned in the eyes of those around me, but there was something else beneath it now. A kind of hardened resolve, a commitment to the empire that had weathered the storm and emerged, if not unscathed, then stronger. Nikolai's empire had been tested, and it had held. I had been a part of that fight, no longer just an observer, but a player in a game that I had once only watched from the sidelines. The power, the violence, the loyalty that ran through the Volkov family had consumed me. But it wasn't just the danger that held me here now. It was the fact that I had found a place for myself, a place where I mattered, a place where I could carve out my future. When I first arrived at the Volkov estate, I had felt like a prisoner in a gilded cage, bound by the invisible chains of Nikolai's world. But now, after everything we had gone through, after the war, the betrayal, the bloodshed, I saw it differently. I was no longer just a captive. I was an equal. Nikolai had made sure of that. The war had consolidated his power, yes, but it had also brought us closer. We had worked together, side by side, to outmaneuver our enemies, to protect the empire that was his legacy. In doing so, I had earned his trust, and he had earned mine. And now, standing in the aftermath, with the weight of everything we had fought for hanging in the balance, we were about to make a decision that would shape both of our futures. I walked through the estate, the halls no longer feeling as oppressive as they once had. I had been a prisoner here, yes, but now I was something more. I was part of the Volkov Empire, no longer just an asset but a partner. I reached the war room, where Nikolai was waiting. His expression was unreadable as always, but I could see the exhaustion beneath the calm. He had been through a lot in these past few weeks, just as I had. His world had been tested, and now, more than ever, he needed to ensure that it wouldn't collapse under the weight of its own ambition. As I entered the room, he looked up from the map spread out before him. His eyes, dark and stormy, met mine, and for a moment, the world outside faded away. It was just the two of us, standing on the precipice of something new, something that could either make or break us both. "You've been invaluable," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of everything he hadn't said before. "I couldn't have done this without you." The words weren't an apology, but they didn't need to be. They were an acknowledgement, one that I hadn't expected to hear from him. I had always known that Nikolai valued power above all else, but in that moment, I realized that I had become something more to him than just a tool to be used. "You don't have to thank me," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside me. "I'm here because I want to be." And that was the truth. Despite everything, despite the danger, the bloodshed, the fact that I had been thrust into this world without warning, I had chosen to stay. I had chosen to fight. I had chosen him. Nikolai didn't speak for a moment, his gaze never leaving mine. He took a slow breath, as though he was weighing something in his mind. Finally, he spoke. "We need to formalize our arrangement," he said, his voice low but steady. "You're no longer just a part of this world. You're a partner, a key player in what happens next." The words settled between us, heavy with meaning. I wasn't just an art restorer anymore. I was part of his world, part of the empire he had built. And that wasn't something he gave to just anyone. He had chosen me. "I'm ready," I said, the words flowing from me without hesitation. "Whatever comes next, I'm ready." Nikolai nodded, his expression softening just slightly, though his demeanor remained as stoic as ever. "Good. Because there's more at stake than just us now. The Empire is stronger, but there are still threats out there. There's still work to be done. I could feel the weight of his words, the enormity of what he was saying. There was no turning back now. I had chosen to be a part of this world, and that meant accepting everything that came with it. The power, the danger, and the responsibility. I'll do whatever it takes, I said, my voice firm. I'm in this with you. Nikolai didn't smile, but I could see the flicker of approval in his eyes. For a moment, it felt like the walls between us had dissolved, like we were no longer just two people navigating a dangerous world. We were a team, partners in this empire, bound by a mutual understanding that went beyond words. But as we stood there, the weight of our decisions settling over us, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing between us. Something deeper than just power, deeper than just survival. I had come to see Nikolai as more than just the ruthless kingpin. I had seen his strength, his intellect, and the quiet tenderness he reserved for those he cared about. I had seen the man behind the power, and I couldn't deny that part of me had begun to care for him. But that wasn't enough to make me forget the truth. This world was dangerous, and no matter how much I had come to respect him, no matter how much I had come to care for him, I couldn't ignore the fact that this was a world built on violence, on loyalty, and on control. You're not just a part of my empire anymore, Avery, Nikolai said, his voice low, his gaze never leaving mine. You're an equal, and together, we'll make sure it thrives. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle deep inside me. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This was where I belonged now. Not just as a captive, not just as a tool, but as a partner, a player in this dangerous game. The stakes were higher than ever. There would be no turning back from this decision. And as Nikolai's hand brushed against mine, the promise of our alliance felt like a new beginning. We had fought together, and now we would build something even greater. A new chapter in both our lives had begun. But even as I stood there with him, I knew the truth. This world, this empire, this was the only life I had now, and there was no escaping it. Not without him. The air was thick with the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. The office, now the heart of the empire, felt like a testament to everything we had fought for, everything we had built together. The walls were adorned with masterpieces, not just of art, but of power and control. Every piece of furniture, every glance exchanged between Nikolai and me, spoke of the empire we had forged from the ashes of our enemies. It was no longer just his world. It was ours. The Volkov Empire had flourished in ways I had never imagined, expanding its reach while solidifying its position as a cornerstone of the criminal underworld. The war that had nearly shattered us had only made us stronger, and now, standing in the center of that empire, I could feel the pulse of it beneath my feet, alive, breathing, and thriving. Nikolai stood by the window, his back to me, watching the city stretch beneath him, his hands clasped behind his back. The storm had passed, but I knew he was always watching, always calculating the next move. He was a man who had no room for complacency, no tolerance for weakness. But that was what I had come to understand about him, what I had come to respect. His power, his ambition, his ruthlessness. All of it had built this empire, and now, together, we were securing its future. As I stood there, watching him, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had brought us here. I had never planned for any of this. My life had been simple before. Art restoration, the quiet hum of brushes on canvas, the preservation of beauty in a world that often overlooked it. But the world I had once known had shattered the moment I stepped into Nikolai Volkov's orbit. And now, I was part of something much larger than I could have ever imagined. I don't think I ever truly understood what it meant to lead. Nikolai's voice broke through my thoughts, his tone as steady as ever. Not until now. I stepped closer to him, feeling the weight of his words settle over me. I had always known that Nikolai was more than just a crime lord. Beneath the cold exterior was a man who carried the burden of his empire alone. He had fought for everything he had, and he had made enemies of the world to build his legacy. But now, standing beside him, I realized just how much of that world he had been willing to give up to allow me in. "You never had to," I replied, my voice steady. "Not when you had me." He turned to face me then, his gaze intense, unreadable. The tension between us had always been palpable, but now, after everything, it was different. There was no longer any question of where we stood. We were partners, equals in this world, and, in some strange, twisted way, I had come to love the life we had built. But there was always a cost, and in this world, nothing was ever free. "Your loyalty is unquestionable, Avery," Nikolai said, his voice softer now, almost vulnerable. "I never doubted it. But there are things you don't understand about this world, things I can't protect you from." I felt the familiar weight of his words, the warning beneath them. There would always be danger, always be enemies lurking in the shadows, waiting for a moment of weakness to strike. It was the nature of the world we lived in. Power was always in flux, always in motion. And in this world, the price of survival was steep. "I'm not afraid," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "Not anymore." The truth was, I had changed. I had gone from being a frightened outsider to someone who could stand by Nikolai's side and not just survive, but thrive. I had learned the rules of this world, the games that were played, the sacrifices that had to be made. And in doing so, I had found my place in it. Nikolai looked at me for a long moment, as if searching for something in my eyes. Then, without warning, he reached out and took my hand, his grip firm and unyielding. "You're stronger than you think," he said, his voice low, the weight of his words settling deep inside me. "But you also need to understand this. We are never safe. This empire, this life, it's a constant war. The moment we let our guard down, it all falls apart." I nodded, understanding. I had seen the truth of it, the constant scheming, the betrayals, the bloodshed. It was a world that demanded more than I had ever expected to give. But now, it was my world too. I wasn't just a bystander in this empire. I was part of its beating heart, its lifeblood. Nikolai released my hand then, his eyes narrowing as he turned back to the window. His presence, his intensity, filled the room like a storm on the horizon. I had become a part of that storm, and there was no going back. "We've secured the empire," Nikolai continued, his voice cutting through the silence. "But there's always more to be done. More enemies to defeat. More territory to claim." I took a step closer, standing beside him, looking out at the sprawling city below. The empire we had built together was vast, its reach extending far beyond anything I had ever dreamed. But even as I stood there, looking out at the future, I knew that nothing would ever be certain. Not in this world. Not with the constant pressure of power, of loyalty, and of love. "We'll handle it," I said, my voice steady, my resolve hardening. "Together." Nikolai's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Together," he agreed. For a moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of the world pressing down on us both. The empire was ours now, but it came at a cost. It always did. And as the minutes stretched into hours, I realized that there was no escaping this world. Not for me. Not for him. We were bound by it. Bound by the choices we had made. Bound by the empire we had built. But there was something else now. Something that neither of us could deny. In this world of power, of violence, of betrayal, we had found something real. We had found each other. And that was enough, for now.